Also, I mean, these problems are not just specific to the Arab and Muslim world. It's universal. I mean, patriarchy exists in every single corner in the world. I mean, I live in the United States, and you see, you know, marriage, like child marriages, take place in more than, I don't know, more than 30 states. So you can get married at 16, just by the consent of your parents in America, right? The supposed free world, you know, the leader of the free world. But so it's very important to contextualize and say, and not create a sui generis case for the Arab slash Muslim world and claim that patriarchy just exists there, misogyny exists there, because I think it's much more universal than that. And it's important that to note that we all get socialized, whether men and women, in these patriarchal realms. Yeah.
As an external viewer, I think that I agree with Sherda that there is patriarchy in all cultures, pretty much, with the exception if you look at an ancient point in Egyptian history where there was certain periods of matriarchy. Generally speaking, there is patriarchy in all cultures, but it manifests itself differently depending on where it is. So, for example, I don't see how, if I walk into a shop and I see overly sexualized marketing that's kind of, when you're with family, it's inappropriate. You don't really need to, there's some things that don't need to be marketed in that way, right? I don't see why that's necessary. I actually view this as a form of gender repression. It's basically objectifying women and using them as a commodity to sell a product. However, I think certain Western commentators tend to come at this discussion from a bit of a high horse, where they assume that the Western world is completely free of its own manifestation of patriarchy, and it's all about the Middle East and how the Middle East is patriarchal. There's like there's a blind spot, I think.
You know, like, have any of you guys watched the documentary Misrepresentation? So the documentary is about basically how we socialize and condition children into gender roles. So how do we, when you have a baby girl versus a baby boy, how do you, like, you get the baby boy little cars and guns, and then you get the baby girl like dolls and whatnot. So like you kind of condition them to become to fulfill these gender roles that are expected and constructed by society. So when I was in college, the director of Misrepresentation came to my school, and she was supposed to give a presentation. So I went to the lunch before, and I sat next to her. So she said, introduce yourself. And I said, my name is Shad, and I'm from Libya. So she said, oh, your country is in severe need of feminism. And so that ticked me off, of course, and I got really offended. But so like when she gave her presentation in front of the entire school, she said, who considers themselves feminists, and who does not. So I put my hand under the who does not. Now, mind you, I do consider myself a feminist, but just because of that, my understanding of how she defined feminist, I didn't agree. So I said no. So when she asked me why I don't consider myself feminist, it was the same thing as I told her, well, if by feminism we're using overly sexualized images of women to sell a car, then my country doesn't need feminism, because we don't put overly sexualized pictures and videos of women in order to sell a car in the streets or on the market. So in that context, I do not need saving, right? Or we do not need saving. So that definitely exists. It's very problematic, and it comes, I think it comes from the concept of Orientalism too. I would argue there's that image of what it means to be Arab and Middle Eastern, that we're very oppressed and we need saving. And I think Condoleezza Rice made that in her speech. She kind of went through that rhetoric and saying that Afghan women need to be liberated. And so yeah, that's extremely problematic.
Yeah.
Yes, go on, Hoda. Yeah, please.
No, I was just, the whole savior, the white male, or and even the white woman savior, like liberal feminists are always trying to save the other. It's rooted in colonialism. And if you look at patriarchy before colonialism, it was a very different kind of patriarchy. And it wasn't as oppressive as patriarchy is today, especially in the Arab world. There was gender roles, but they were equally valued. And so with patriarchy, with these gendered and like racial hierarchies that came with it, colonialism and the gendered and racial hierarchies that came with it, came this new form of patriarchy, which we've internalized. And then the savior of like the Muslim woman from the Muslim man and the brown woman from the brown man. And we see that also internalized within our own communities, like even in Canada, about like the banning of the headscarf in Quebec. And then also, like in a more broad sense, you see it in terms of like Stephen Harper, the old conservative leader. He tried to like come up with all these bills, like Bill 70, which kind of was like banning barbaric practices. And what are these barbaric practices? And what are they constituted under? And they're always, it's just like, neocolonialism is continually being refurbished in today's society. And like this, but like when you trace patriarchy, it comes from the West. Like patriarchy as we know it today, it comes and is rooted from the West and colonialism. So it's just very mind-blowing, really.
I would...
Sorry, Layla, just before you come in, I just wanted to ask Emel if she has a different experience, because Emel is, if she doesn't mind me mentioning, she's about 18 years old. So she's from a different generation to myself. I'll speak for myself, so don't.
Hey, Osama, I was just
from
going
myself.
to say, did you just say you were old?
I said from myself. Okay.
Just for yourself. The rest of us is 14.
Okay. So yeah, I was wondering if Emel has a different experience in this.
Sorry, a different experience, like with what point exactly?
Do you everything that was mentioned by Khawla, Shada, Jennifer and Layla, do you relate with, or was there anything they mentioned that you don't relate with?
Everything, I think everything they mentioned is right. Like, I think it's always painted like that Muslim women need like saving in whatever way, when they don't. Sorry, your point earlier where it was about marketing, like sometimes things are overly sexualized in marketing. I do have a problem with that, but like I think most of society doesn't have a problem with that. But what they do have a problem is when women capitalize off like their sexuality themselves, like Instagram models or whatever, when they use it to sell a product. People have a lot more issue with that than they actually do when women are being used to, like usually by men, to sell a car or whatever.
Yeah.
People tend to have it more when it's the woman capitalizing off it. So I don't know. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And we spoke about that last time as well, didn't we? Yeah. Layla, you were going to say something.
I'm just reflecting. Everything you're saying is so rich, but I wanted to say exactly what Khala was saying. It's like we're talking about it from very different points. Like I could spin them into 3, maybe 4. But the first one is, I agree with you, Osama. It's very Eurocentric way of defining what is very based on that. How do you define patriarchy and how it is? But it's also the look and the Orientalist, like Shada said. But then I would agree again with Khawla that the post-colonial, and especially in the places where there has been very long-term post-colonial impact, just like if you talk about India, or if you talk about Palestine, the post-British mandate, for example, which has left more entrenched way of that. And I have two examples thinking of it. The first one is, for example, if you add to that layer Palestine, when we talk about how women are oppressed and how colonialism and post-colonialism has affected that. So for example, when the occupation came, when the Israeli occupation inherited colonialism from the British and the many others here in Palestine, they've added another layer. They enabled patriarchy in some way. So they gave it more of an enabling environment, because, for example, when it becomes, there's a threat from Israeli illegal settlers or an Israeli checkpoint, the women are less enabled to do so. So you're not allowed to go out because there are Israeli soldiers. You're not allowed to go at night because there's danger and security. You're not allowed because you need to protect your children, because you need to, and then the woman conditions itself because of occupation. I cannot do this, but I'm doing something. So we condition ourselves that we're doing something greater, but at the same time, we're being held more. And this enables patriarchy to take place. And going back to what Shada was said, I had a very striking example of how we can shake that. And this brings me to the last point, which I totally believe in. It's about how do you change this mainstreaming, or how do you change these the very early stereotyping that gets into a girl's life or a boy's life? And it happened to me like in two different occasions, but I'll describe the most embarrassing one. So it was a Good Friday. I'm Christian, so it was Good Friday. We're going to church, and I had my niece that Osama was asking about. So my favorite niece, she's with me. She's stuck with me. She likes to go with her auntie, and we're getting into church, and it's packed. You know, like it's festive, and everybody is there. But it's Good Friday. Everybody is silent. So we're getting into a very sacred moment. And because the church was and evidently because culturally it was separated, so men are on one side and women are on one side. So we go in, they had to mix us a bit, and we're closer to the men's side because there's not enough room. So we go in, and she sees a man with a ponytail in the church, and she's like 4 or 5, I cannot remember, and she shouts, you know, like at the top of her lungs, like, "Oh my God, look, auntie, he has a ponytail like girls." It's like we're mid church, and she says that very loud. And I say in Arabic, so he's like, "Na'am abuki." Like I curse her father's like, "Okay, Habibti, it's okay." And then I had to do her, like I had to make a lesson for her and all the other nephews and nieces, like boys can have their long hair, girls can have short hair. And I had shorter hair then, and they struggled even accepting me with shorter hair. Like they heard from each other, like, "Amto, I don't like your short hair, maybe it should be longer." And I had this discussion with them, like I mainstreamed it into all their discussions. I had to say, like, it's okay for a girl to have a short hair. Who says she needs or she must have a long hair? And then it goes to colors, to the play, to the toys, to everything. And it's so difficult to challenge this. I mean, like a 4-year-old can tell me, my niece is like, "No, I don't want my cousin to play with me. It's a pink toy, it's for girls." And it strikes you like it starts in so entrenched into the culture of education. It gets mainstreamed in the little things, and even jokes. Sometimes I challenge people, going to our earlier discussion, challenging people on social media. I challenge people who put like jokes on women driving. It's like, no, you cannot do that, because this joke becomes a culture. This joke becomes funny, but then it gets stuck into your head that women actually cannot drive because they are women, not because they're bad at driving that specific individual. And for me, this is what happens. These components get together, and they get entrenched into the culture more than a religion, because I believe the culture is a bigger vessel for religion, beliefs, gender, and other ones, because there's a different culture of something. So, for example, if you say Arab Muslim women and then you say non-Arab Muslim women, it's a totally different culture, which makes sense. In a previous job, I used to work with Osama. We used to have online video conferencing and dialogue with students around the world, and I witnessed dialogues of Muslim students in Jordan who speak Arabic. They're Arabic Muslim with non-Arabic Muslims in Indonesia. And it was so totally different speaking to both of them. Like both groups were like, they were learning about each other, because it was really funny. Like the students would talk about their festivals. And the students from Indonesia, they would say, "Oh, my favorite festival is Eid al-Fitr." And the students were sitting like this, the Arabs, they didn't even realize it was Eid al-Fitr, which comes after Ramadan. And it's breaking that kind of culture, because these components can do this kind of stuff. And then in the upbringing, in the education, in the mainstreaming of stereotyping, all of these notions, this is where we compose all these kind of stuff. So every component that comes in adds another layer for me. Like post-colonialism, I agree with Khawla so much. And then the education and the stereotyping that builds up, and then the conditioning the women have to do, and then the patriarchy that sometimes is empowered by these components, and then the other places. So we see, for example, the blow against Muslim people who they say, or they mention, they claim they came and claimed Europe. Because if you look also at, sorry, I'm taking this too long, but if you look also at the history of post-colonialism and the Eurocentral idea of patriarchy and how it changed, and the Enlightenment, and then the taking out religion out of the picture, and then it becomes something that and then another like religion comes back to Europe in a different shape. And this is where and it changes for me. Basically, just to finish up with this idea, is it's like the culture and the context that these components would come in together and create that kind of condition where you are. Are you accepted as a Muslim European in Europe? Are you accepted as more as an Arab Muslim? Are you accepted as a woman without these components? Or if you are all of them, how do they treat you? How do they look at you? For example, for me, I would end up, it's different for me because I get treated differently because they think I'm Muslim because I'm Palestinian. They take me out of context because, oh, you're Palestinians or you're Muslims? Like, no, and then I have to explain this kind of identity inside of me. And I think I talk too much, sorry, but it's like all these components together that create this culture and upbringing where it makes me.
Layla, I think you mentioned something really interesting, which is that in the Palestinian church, the men and women are separate, and you see, this is the thing. Like, there isn't much
Arab culture because it's not because people perceive Christianity as something European, but they forget that we are Arab by culture.
Exactly.
And all our behaviors are so Arab. We're very conservative in dressing. We're very conservative. We're very firm on women and gender. We kill girls sometimes. Like, we have incidents where girls were killed because they've done something, or they are outspoken about their sexuality. It's not something that we talk about because we are in an Arab culture. We're Arabs first.
Yeah.